Chapter 3. This is called Escape. I want you to be paying attention to the descriptive words of what the barn looks like. See if you can picture it in your mind. See if you can smell the smells that are in the barn. All right, here we go. The barn was very large. It was old. It smelled of hay and it smelled of manure. Ew. It smelled of perspiration of tired horses. Perspiration is sweat. And the wonderful sweet breath of patient cows. It often had a sort of peaceful smell, as though nothing bad could ever happen in the world. It smelled of grain and of harness dressing, of axle grease and of rubber boots and new rope. And whenever the cat was given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell of fish. But mostly it smelled of hay, for there was always hay in the great loft up overhead. And there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and the horses and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in the winter when the animals spent most of their time indoors. And it was pleasantly cool in the summer when the big doors stood open to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups on the main floors for the cows, and a sheepfold down below for the sheep, a pig pen, and Wilbur. It was full of all sorts of things that you would find in barns. Ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, lawn mowers, snow shovels, axe handles, milk pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows like to build their nests in. It was the kind of barn that children like to play in. And the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that a manure pile is a great place to keep a young pig. Ew, can you imagine living in the manure pile? Pigs love it. Pigs need the warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down there in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came home almost every day to visit him. She found an old milking stool that had been discarded, which means thrown out, and she placed the stool in the sheepfold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese, who lived with the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out, and he did not allow her to get into the pig pen. But he told Fern that she could sit on the stool and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know that she was sitting right there, right outside his pen. But he never had any fun. No walks, no rides, no swims. And if you remember, Fern took him all sorts of places when he was just a little infant. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered into his small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. There's never anything to do around here, he thought. He walked slowly to his food trough and sniffed to see if anything had been overlooked from lunch. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched. So he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. When he was tired of this, he walked indoors, climbed to the top of the manure pile, and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired of standing still and tired of laying down. I'm less than 2 months old and I'm tired of living, he said. He walked out to the yard again. When I'm out here, he said, there's no place to go but in. And when I'm indoors, there's no place to go but out into the yard. That's where you're wrong, my friend, said a voice. Wilbur looked to the fence and saw a goose standing there. You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard, said the goose, who talked rather fast. One of the boards is loose. Push on it. Push on it, and come on out. What? Said Wilbur. Say it slower. At the risk of repeating myself, said the goose, I suggest that you come out. It's wonderful out here. Did you say a board was loose? That I did, said the goose. Wilbur walked up to the fence and saw the goose was right. One board was loose. He put his head down, shut his eyes, and pushed, and the board gave way. In a minute, he had squeezed through the fence and was standing in the long grass outside the yard. The goose chuckled. "How does it feel to be free?" she asked. "I like it," Wilbur said. "That's it, I guess. I like it." Actually, Wilbur felt queer to be on the outside of his fence with nothing between him and the big world. "Where do you think I'd better go?" "Anywhere you like," said the goose. "Go down through the orchard, root up the sod, go through the garden, dig up the radishes, root up everything, eat grass, look for corn, look for oats, run all over, skip and dance and jump and prance, go down to the orchard and stroll in the woods. The world is a wonderful place when you're young." "I can see that," replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, and stopped. He looked all around, sniffed the smells of the afternoon, and then set off walking through the orchard. Pausing in the shade of an apple tree, he put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone had noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the men. "Homer!" she cried. "Pigs out! Lurvy, pigs out! Homer, Lurvy, pigs out! He's down under that apple tree." "Now the trouble starts," thought Wilbur. "Now I'll catch it." The goose heard the racket, and she too started hollering. "Run, run, run, downhill! Make for the woods, she shouted to Wilbur. "They'll never, never catch you in the woods." The cocker spaniel heard the commotion and ran out to the barn to join in the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came out of the machine shed where he was mending a tool. Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling wheat. Everybody walked towards Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The wood seemed a long way off, and anyway, he had never been down there in the wood, and he wasn't sure he would even like it. "Get around behind him, Lurvy," said Mr. Zuckerman, "and drive him towards the barn. And take it easy. Don't rush him. I'll go get a bucket of slops." The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals of the place. Whenever any creature broke loose on Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest to the others. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and all of the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lambs learned about it from their mothers. The horses in the stall in the barn pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollering, and soon the horses had caught on to what everything was happening. "Wilbur's out," they said. Every animal stirred and lifted his head and became excited to know that one of his friends had gotten free and was no longer pinned up or tied. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to run. It seemed as though everybody was chasing him. "If this is what it's like to be free," he thought, "I believe I'd rather be penned up in my own yard." The cocker spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other side, and Mrs. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he started to the garden. And now Mr. Zuckerman was coming down the hill towards him carrying a pail. "This is really awful," thought Wilbur. "Why doesn't Fern come?" And he began to cry. The goose took command and began to give orders. "Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about," cried the goose. "Skip around, run toward me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out. Make for the woods, twist and turn." The cocker spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran. Lurvy reached out and grabbed. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Lurvy. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's leg. Lurvy missed and grabbed the spaniel instead. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run downhill, suggested the cows. Run toward me, yelled the gander. Run uphill, cried the sheep. Turn and twist, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Imagine the chaos. Look out for Lurvy, called the cows. Look out for Zuckerman, yelled the gander. Watch out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, said the goose. Oh, my light went out. I'm sitting too still. Oh, there we go. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by this hullabaloo. He didn't like being in the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him, but he couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time, and he couldn't turn and twist when he was jumping and dancing. And he was crying so hard he could barely see anything that was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern was there to take him in his arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat muddlings, Kellogg's cornflakes, and a popover left from Zuckerman's breakfast. "Come, Pig," said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. "Come, Pig." Wilbur took a step towards the pail. "No, no, no," yelled the goose. "It's the old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity. He's appealing to your stomach." Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step towards the pail. "Pig, Pig," said Mr. Zuckerman. He began to walk slowly towards the barn, looking at him innocently, as if he didn't know the little white pig was following behind him. "You'll be sorry, sorry, sorry," called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking towards the pail of slops. "You'll miss your freedom," honked the goose. "An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops." Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slops into the trough. Then he pulled the loose board away from the fence so that there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. "Reconsider, reconsider," cried the goose. Wilbur paid him no attention. He stepped through the fence into his yard. He walked to the trough and took a long drink of slops, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the popover. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8-penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. "He's quite a pig," said Lurvy. "Yes, he'll make a good pig," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt the warm milk inside his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a long, tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. "I'm really too young to go out into the world alone," he thought as he lay down.